We're back on Monday night.
We're back.
Monday night podcast, HR and tomfoolery.
Like Monday Night Football, but better.
Much better. Do you watch
Sure, there's
basketball?
many people that would disagree with that. Um, I do a little bit because my husband's obsessed with it, and so he makes me watch the highlights reels with him.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know they love basketball.
He does. It's like the only sport he really follows.
Okay, well then I'll just have to talk to him about it. I've
What
been
what do you have to say?
just that like it's almost the playoffs.
Mm,
Uh, I've been watching more of it. I only care about the playoffs, but this year, like, I don't know, the older I get, the more interested I am in like players versus teams. And there's just like a lot of shakeup all the time with that. And so it's been interesting to see some of the players and where they're at and what they're doing. So
yeah, he's definitely into players more than teams.
yeah. Yep.
Uh,
The Cleveland
he
Cavs
likes.
are best in the East. So it's been a fun year for that, if we were to care about teams.
Way to go, Cleveland. Okay,
Yeah.
Ohio.
Yeah. They started out the
Um,
season like 22 games undefeated or something. Something like
wow,
22, 24, something, 20, I don't
that's
know.
impressive.
But yeah, they've done well.
I mean,
So
basketball players are incredible athletes. They're fun to watch. I don't know why I never got into watching like a ton on television, but like I love a live basketball game. And I do like watching the highlights reels and the crazy shots that they make sometimes. He explains things to me that I don't understand. So
yeah.
more enjoyable when you understand a little bit more of the game and can appreciate the athleticism and the
Right.
strategy that goes into it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I appreciate this.
March Madness.
That's coming up too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We usually do a March Madness team bracket, and it takes me a really long time because I have to like Google stats and I like to make informed choices. It
Yeah. How's that worked out for you?
takes me just a really long time to make my
Well, like,
decisions.
how's your bracket? How's your brackets done in the past by result of your process?
I don't know, probably not well. I think I make it to like, usually the third or fourth round, and then it all goes off the rails.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I make all my decisions are purely emotional. So my brackets never do well past the first round. They're
yeah,
all about
yeah.
like, places I've been or whatever, games I've been to, teams that I
It's
like. Yeah.
entirely random.
Yeah.
No, I literally will Google like how they're doing that year and who they're playing against and then make like a gut decision if they kind of have similar stats of like, okay, well, who do I think is gonna win? But ultimately it's still a total guess, because I'm not
Yeah.
following them throughout the year. So
Well, anything
yeah,
can
I
happen.
like I like making informed decisions. And then going with my gut, not just like arbitrary decisions.
Yeah. I'm always just happy when like crazy things happen.
Oh
Crazy
yeah, the
upsets
upsets are
happen.
the
I'd much
best.
rather have that than have my bracket do well. So,
Oh yeah, it's way more fun.
yeah, my bracket never does well, and I'm okay with it because, like last year, I think there was a ton of upsets. But yeah, I always make our bracket for our company like in Google Sheets, and
I know.
it's like the
And I always
conditional.
fill out the wrong way first.
I've got it conditionally formatted, so everything tallies the points and tells you, highlights it if the person won or lost.
Yeah, you did a good job with that. Uh, we'll see. We'll see about this year.
Yeah.
Who wins? Do you remember who won last year?
Nope.
Okay. I don't even know if we tallied it.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, well,
Oh,
hopefully we'll have time this year for March Madness
oh
tomfoolery.
yeah,
You've been
I know.
busy out of the office.
Yeah, I have been.
Yeah.
Have been a lot happening.
Yeah. So we've
But
got
it's good to
a,
make time for the fun things.
hmm yep, have to make time for the fun things, but all within reason. So
Yeah.
how's it been balancing things with being out of the office and how the workplace is set up?
Um,
Because your work hasn't stopped, right? And I
no,
still I
it
still
hasn't
call you
stopped.
every day. So
Just to talk. Hey, hey, Will, what's up? Nothing. What you
you
doing?
you called me.
A million things. What are you doing? Nothing. So why are you bothering me, Will?
Yep.
Just want to talk.
I love forcing the conversation to you saying you called me. That's my ultimate goal. Once I hear that, it makes me laugh, and then we can get down to business.
No, it's been fine. It's stressful feeling like you're falling behind, but at the same time, like I think that's the beauty of how we're set up, like the flexibility of our team is that everyone just kind of ebbs and flows as needed, and everyone's willing to dive in and help. So it was really cool to be able to like say, I'm thinking of dropping everything and going and taking the next, week and a half to tend to personal matters. Um, and have you guys just be like, yeah, we got you. We'll step in. Um, I guess that's the beauty of like cross training too, right? Like everybody is trained on most things, and we also have people to call on that are experts on our team. So if anything super niche comes up, we have people willing to help, but we all kind of know what's going on and where to pick up where someone's left off and try to reduce friction as much as possible for clients, which is the goal. Because like nothing's worse than feeling like you're failing a client because you can't get to stuff all the time. So
Yeah. But our business is a little bit unique, with the flexibility. And we've always been remote even before COVID. So
yeah.
not all businesses have our luxury. What do you recommend for, because I think a common challenge that businesses balance is, like how much is enough, how much flexibility is enough. And I know like my mother's a manager, like a practice manager, and she constantly has like employees that, push too hard, take advantage too much. Um,
Hmm.
and like are constantly whatever calling off or um not showing up on time or not following through on like some of their deadlines, things like that. And I think a lot of businesses, especially the ones that are in office, that have to be in office for whatever kind of service, struggle with that of like, how do we balance the flexibility and um, having people like produce a good service without pushing people too hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to connection, right? Like there's always going to be people that there's always going to be people that take advantage. And typically it's not the majority, you hope, right? Like if it is the majority, then maybe there's something wrong. Either we're hiring the wrong people or our culture is not set up in a way that people feel a sense of ownership in their work. Um, because there's been many places that, you know, I've I've worked with that have had those issues one off, but typically where it's a pervasive issue, it becomes either like a hiring and like staffing problem, like you're hiring the wrong people and that culture's kind of like compounding, or um, leadership hasn't done a great job of building trust and camaraderie and connection between the employees, and therefore people are just showing up, to collect a paycheck and go home. And when that's the case, yeah, everything else is a priority, right? Because really, work just then becomes a vessel to pay your bills. Um, and so people do the bare minimum. Um, So I think, like one of the reasons, like, yes, we have a unique business, but I've worked with enough clients to realize that most people want to do a good job and they also want to feel appreciated and valued for what they do, right? And people are also willing to do more for someone they care about. And so when you care about your colleague or you care about your leader on a personal level, it then becomes a different dynamic. And that has to be reciprocal, right? Like when you start caring about your people on a personal level, hopefully the reciprocity starts to evolve over time and they start caring about you on a personal level. Like the more you open up, the more you share. That doesn't mean being inappropriate, right? Or like um, some people have like very harsh boundaries between work and personal. And I just don't think that um, lends itself to good relationship building. Like there still needs to be some breaking down of barriers between work and personal to build a true connection. When you're connected to someone, you're more likely to want to help them, to want to give your best. And when people feel cared about on a personal level, same thing. They're more likely to want to do their best because they feel seen and supported. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the boundaries are always important, but to me, what I've seen play out, you tell me you've seen different. It's like there's always exceptions, but for the most part, if you're doing a good job helping people feel connected to you as a leader, to each other as a team, and to the business, um, they show up in a different way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point about like opening up and like allowing people to get to know you because then that creates the opportunity for people to care, right? Uh,
Right.
yeah, I think that's a big part of it. It's like sometimes the leaders have to take the first step in that, especially since leaders, set the tone for the team and
100% leaders have to take the first step. Um, Especially because there's been so many people that have been burned before by companies. They're treated like expendable resources. And when you treat people like an expendable resource, they will show up like an expendable resource.
hmm,
And they'll use you like an expendable resource too. It's like you're helping me pay my bills for now, but I have no um, loyalty to you because nobody's had loyalty to me. And so you start to view sadly, people can get jaded and they get start to view every job, every company as um, temporary because they feel like they're temporary. Um, and I think it takes the leader to show, like, no, like I genuinely care about you and what's going on, and how do I support you? But you still draw the line, right? Like if you've got someone that's taking advantage of that, you can still share like, hey, I want to support you. We still need to get these things done, so let's make a plan together, right? Like empowering people to kind of come up with a solution that works, that still gets the job done within a reasonable manner, but you show that you're willing to make accommodations um, and make it work to a degree. So an example would be, I had this in my recent article. My sister works at a higher education facility, and this this leader is like super anti telework, so he says. But then there's some people that he'll make that accommodation for. But for everybody else, it's like, no, absolutely not. We don't do that here. Um, and maybe you have a reason for maybe you have a reason for that, but when it comes to her approaching them and saying like, hey, my dad just got diagnosed with a terminal illness, he's going to have severe degradation over the next months, year, whatever, he's going to need more help. um I'd like to be able to take an occasional Monday to go in so I can drive in Friday afternoon and come back on Monday. Can I telework on an occasional Monday so that I'm not missing work, right? Like as much. And it's like, no, no, you can't. you're going to have to take the full day and you need to plan out your schedule in advance. It's like when you draw a hard boundary with people like that and you're not willing to see their situation from a human perspective and find a solution, when you're coming at it from like a hard line of like, nope, you don't fit into my plan. And so you need to figure it out versus like, wow, that's a horrible situation. I'm so sorry. Like, I don't typically believe in telework, but like, let's figure out something um, to make it work. Right. Hey, I don't want telework to be an ongoing thing, but let's say for the next 6 months, we try it out that, you know, every third Monday you telework and come back and you're back in office by Tuesday. And let's see how it goes. Does your work suffer? Right. And we'll put some measurements in place to kind of see and make sure that things are not getting dropped. At least you're showing flexibility and a willingness to work with somebody, and they're more likely to work with you and to want to like do a good job to show that they can handle it. Like, hey, I appreciate that flexibility. I will do my best um, to not drop the ball. Right. So I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but
No, that makes sense. And I think what I always wonder is like, there has to be a reason behind the policy, right? It might not be, um, like it might not be a reason that's been revisited, but like there has to be a reason for, for something. And so I think a lot of it is just like revisiting the reasons and understanding if there is, something that can be done. Because I think a lot of businesses do have challenges around, being able to be flexible. And so that's where I always wonder like what is the best balance?
mm-hmm. Every time I've run into an issue with flexibility, it's not actually an issue with flexibility, it's an issue with accountability.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's an issue with people feeling uncomfortable with following through on the accountability when the flexibility is abused.
Hmm.
And so it becomes easier for them to just take away any option of flexibility so that there's less wiggle room for it to be abused. And then they don't have to deal with the uncomfortable situation of addressing um, when it's a problem,
Hmm.
right? Or the hard choices that have to be made when it's a problem. And that's kind of human nature, right? Like we want the path of least resistance. So that was another article I read about, like it's kind of a made up word I joke about, but like over policizing because we don't want to have to spend the time or the energy thinking about or dealing with the problem when it arises. So we just put a bunch of policies in place to kind of cover our butt and make sure it doesn't arise to begin with, right? Like
Hmm.
if you give people very limited space, they can't color outside the lines. If you give them a ton of space, there's a lot of interpretations within that space, right? So then it falls on like you have to set clear expectations, you have to check in, you have to hold people accountable. Um, so it's more work. But there's also shown that there's more creativity and more payoff to that flexibility as well, right? More innovation
Yeah.
happens, more empowerment happens, more like positive risk taking happens. Like there's so many positive things that happen, but um, it requires stronger leadership.
Hmm.
Um, and that's hard for people. And I think I was talking about someone like talking to someone the other day, they were finding that self awareness is one of the strongest skills a leader can have. And if we're having a gut reaction to something and we don't even remember why we feel that way about it, like you said, it might be time to revisit like, did I get burned on that before? Am I now like, do I have a personal bias against this thing now because I got burned? And is that a good enough reason to now make everybody abide by um, this policy to have to avoid dealing with it? Or is that a me issue? Is that something like I need to figure out how to work through? Um, because I need to be a stronger leader in that area instead of just hiding behind a policy that makes it easier for me.
Yeah. No, that's a good point about like being burned, but not connecting it to the future or what, what needs to be revisited for the future. Like I always love when when you're talking about anything with anyone, a business contract or a job or this or that, and they're like trying to understand whatever terms or policies, and they're like the common terminology is like, not that I think you would do this, but in the past we've had people do XYZ, and so that's why we have this term in the contract, or that's why we have, you know, this stipulation in the offer and blah blah blah. And it's like, why even say that? Like, why? Not that I think you would do it. Like, well, then what's the point? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like, it's a difference, it's a nuance between like clear communication versus like safeguarding, right? Like you might realize, oh, that happened in the past. And so I've learned to create clear communication around my expectations with this versus like, oh, that happened in the past. So now we don't even do that anymore because we don't want anyone to do that again.
Mhm.
It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So, and when we like to tie everything back to dating because it's something that everyone can relate to for the most part. But it's like if you are dating someone and they burn you, you're not going to be like, well, I'm not dating anymore. I'm not dating anyone that's 6'2" with brown hair and blue eyes anymore because that dude like messed me up. So now I'm not dating anyone that looks like him. It's like that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like you wouldn't hopefully do that. That would be like, okay, that's a trauma response, and I need to work on that because the love of my life could be 6'2" with brown hair and blue eyes. Like, and now I'm not dating any of them because this one person screwed me over, and I can't get past that.
Mhm.
Right. So it wouldn't make sense in that context. Yet we kind of do something similar to that in work all the time
Sure.
by having these personal biases or feelings against certain situations or certain people or certain setups with work. We're like, no, we're not doing that. We don't even want to mess with that because we got burned on that before.
Hmm.
I think we would be better off as a leader being self-aware and understanding like maybe I need to address that in myself. Like how would I handle that differently moving forward, and how can I work through the uncomfortable feelings associated with it versus hiding from it or
Yeah.
hiding behind a policy for it.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily like the best innovation always comes from like the free thinking companies that, have more flexibility and have more freedom. But and so like I don't want to say that they don't have policies. It's just that, and I don't even want to say that their policies aren't organized. It's just that their policies are more pointed towards the interaction piece. Like I always think about like when I worked in restaurants, I was a manager, early in my career. And I was like 21 years old and I was managing 60 people, and pretty much all of them were older than me, you know what I mean? And a lot of them had worked
Mm-hmm.
there longer than me. You know what I mean? So there was like this like discomfort, for me of like number one, like being brand new into that type of role, being brand new into like a professional role where as a leader, and like not having those skills. And so, there was a lot of hesitation, that I had with trying to manage people because of, they had been there longer or they had been doing their job for longer or whatever. And so like early on, I'm such an organizational nut, you know what I mean? And I did a great job with like reorganizing the building and making like the process of things like flow better. But in that process, I tried to like hang more signs, right? And I'm like, oh, like we'll hang more signs and then that'll like tell people what to do, you know? But of course, like
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't tell people what to do. Like
I
they
don't
they
care.
might read the sign, but they're not going to follow the sign. Like you have to have that one-on-one coaching and mentorship with them so that they understand the value and to understand that like they know that you're watching them for accountability. Like a sign is not holding them accountable. And so that's why like a lot of people don't follow the signs if they don't want to, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
um long-winded way of saying like there it's not that like the free thinking companies that have a lot of innovation don't have processes or policies. It's that those processes and policies are geared more towards the individual and the human aspect. And so
Mm-hmm.
like what we help our clients with our leadership training as it flows through into like how you're managing your people and your people operations are those, the structured one-on-ones. And so, with what we're talking about today, if you for holding someone accountable or giving someone more flexibility that might be out of the norm for the company or might be out of the norm for the department, like having that conversation up front where it's very clearly organized of like, this is what we're going to do, this is what our expectation is, and the expectation is derived from the cultural values and the service model. So here's what our expectation is, and then that, and you just kind of leave it at that, right? You don't even like give them like specific instructions necessarily. You just tell them the expectation that's derived from what your culture is. So then in a week or 2 weeks, you can check back in and be like, well, we talked about this. And it might be going great. Like, hey, it's going great. We talked about this. You're meeting the expectations just like what we talked about, or not. Like, hey, we talked about this. You're not meeting the expectations. Like, and then making sure that you approach that conversation with grace, right?
Right.
It's like, is there
Right.
a reason why you're not meeting the expectations, or did something change, or did we find out that this
Right.
wasn't possible with those expectations? And then,
Right. Do we need
you
to
know,
adjust a little bit?
you have to adjust. With our leadership
Mhm.
development and coaching, we're like we adjust every 2 or 3 weeks, with what we do with those leaders. So, and they adjust what they're doing with their team, at that same pace. So, um, yeah, I think that like focusing on the individual, having your process be focused on the individual and not necessarily the company is what then leads to more flexibility and how you can have a more flexible workplace in maybe an industry or a service that could be more rigid.
Right. And the more that leaders start to build a sense of like competence in managing some of those conversations and setting some of those guidelines and following through, right, with individuals, the more they start to develop confidence that they can handle situations as they arise without having to like prescribe every little thing,
Mhm.
right? Like, I need to have all these things in place to make sure this doesn't happen. Well, guess what? It's like, it's going to happen. Something's going to happen inevitably,
Mhm.
right? So instead of trying to over prescribe everything, how do we build leaders' confidence and competence in handling things as they arise? And therefore, there's less need for rigidity because you have a better, like, understanding that if something comes up, you can handle it. Like, yeah, we'll address it. If it arises, we'll address it, and
Yep.
then we'll move forward. Like, and it doesn't need to be a whole thing. It doesn't need to be crippling. And just like any other muscle, right? As you kind of um, build the exposure and the experience of handling those types of conversations and the accountability piece and things that feel kind of uncomfortable, you're building that muscle and it loses some of the discomfort over time. It's just like, this is just a conversation. This is just, it is what it is. We're just talking about it. We're putting something in place, or we're following up, or we're making a decision, that's best for us in the business and moving forward. So,
Yeah, and it's easier to like so kind of the point of what I was saying, which you alluded to as well, is like it's easier to have that second conversation if you have a good first conversation, right?
right.
But I think that's where leaders get hung up is like it's hard to discipline people if you didn't set the expectations clearly in the first conversation. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
harder to like backtrack. Um,
Right.
yeah. And so that's why
And
it's
what I find is that instead of having that first conversation, they want to write a policy about it
right.
because they
That's what
don't
you
want
were
to have to
saying.
have the conversation, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's like, well, this person did that and we didn't set clear expectations. So now we need to put a policy. It's like, you don't need to have a policy. You just need to put better communication around it,
right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
or intervene sooner
Yeah.
before it becomes a problem. So,
Yeah, I think that it's helpful to adjust when thinking of like balancing a flexible workplace so that your business is focused on its people because the people are the most valuable asset. People love to talk about that without actually like doing anything really to support
mhm.
that. But And what's crazy is like it costs so much money. You know what I mean? It costs so much money to replace people. So I don't know,
It
but
does. And it also costs a lot of money, and this is harder to measure, right? When people stay in place, but they're disconnected.
yeah,
And it's so easy to disconnect someone, right? And it's always tied back to an emotional experience. Always.
yeah,
Never once have I heard a situation where an employee is like disengaged from a company because of something that didn't have an emotional tie to it.
right,
Like they felt like they got screwed over, or they were dehumanized, or they were, um, you know, name it, right? A million things, right? But it's always an emotional response because we are emotional beings. And when you're working through people, you have to have a clear understanding um, of emotions, and you have to calibrate for that, right? Like you're not dealing with a robot, you're dealing with a person. And it just takes one bad interaction to disengage someone. And then it's extremely expensive because you've got someone filling a seat who's doing the bare minimum. And there's not really too much you can do about that. They tend to actually drain the resources more because they're not necessarily actively disengaged. Like they're not doing things to tank your business, or they're not actually like acting out or doing anything that you can put your finger on to say, like, we need to fire that person, but they're also not doing your business service either. They're
yeah,
just kind of existing. So that's very, very costly, and it doesn't take much. Or they're existing until they find something better because you ticked them off, or hurt them in some way, or made them feel like they were replaceable in a number, and so they start treating you the same way.
mhm.
So,
I think a lot of business owners, that's their main challenge is the employees that are just drifting along. That's what I always hear, from my conversations in networking is like that's the biggest challenge isn't necessarily hiring, it's more about like the ones that, and it's not the problem employees either that's their biggest challenge, it's the ones that are just kind of like drifting along. So
yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
and not everyone's going to be a star player all the time, but like you also don't want people just showing up doing the bare minimum.
yeah,
That's not helpful.
sure. Well, back to balancing a business's flexibility, I think the other thing that I wanted to mention, which we use in our model that helps people if you sporadically have to step away from something, like something else that's really helpful is having consultants or a fractional resource, because that's someone that you can call that can be on demand and kind of step in and fill the gap for a short time period, which is usually all you need. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that's a huge resource that the market's kind of going that way, but a lot of people still don't utilize it, where it's like hire a fractional resource, have consultants in place, and putting consultants in place is not an easy task, right? And so like a lot of businesses just like don't spend the time with networking and continually interviewing to have like a warm list of people to call to be like, hey, we're in a pinch and we need your help. Are you available? Because the first person you call is probably not going to be available, or the second or the
Yeah.
third. But if you have like a nice warm pool of people that you've already interviewed, you've already vetted, and maybe you've already introduced to your systems that you can call and they can step in. I mean, we've done that countless times, and that's what keeps our business so flexible is utilizing consultants. But you can do that same thing with a fractional resource too.
Yeah, I mean, we moved into a gig economy post COVID, right? So like and it's also just really expensive to live. So a lot of people are willing to take on additional work, or they want the flexibility of part-time work, or whatever it is. But it's good to have people trained on your business, and that goes into like workforce planning too. Like what is your backup plan? How are you growing and developing people, and how are you filling those knowledge gaps? Because the worst is when it happens and you have nothing in place, and then you're scrambling,
Yeah.
right? And then the business gets negatively impacted. And so it's a lot easier to be flexible with people when you know you have a contingency plan,
Mhm.
right? And that's what I was starting with, is like it was easy to be flexible because we're all trained on what we do and we are each other's contingency plan. And so it's easy to say like I'm going to step away for a week and a half, and I know like everyone knows where my files are, right? They're all organized on the drive that we all can see. I'm able to give kind of a rundown of where I'm leaving off with clients and what I need. You guys know where to kind of step in. You've been introduced to most of my clients already. So it's not like a total stranger. So it's like we have that as how we work. That's just how we work. Like we have a plan, we have backup plans, we have people trained on each other's stuff, and it becomes very easy to say like, yeah, of course we can be flexible with you. We got this, and just step in. Versus like, what do you mean you're going away for a week? Like nobody knows what you do, and well, like where is everything, and what do I do if I don't know how to access this file? And it's like, it's so you have to kind of plan for that. And when you create a plan or a structure around flexibility doesn't become so scary. It's
Mhm.
just like, yeah, we have what we need. Um, and we have a backup plan. And so you can just do more to support people without it negatively impacting your business.
Sure. Yep. And I always think about, for fractional resources, I always think about Dwight Schrute talking. He's like giving a sales pitch to somebody, and he's like, "This is my personal number, and I don't celebrate major holidays, and I never take a vacation, and I haven't been sick in whatever, 26 years or something, you know?" And so
Yeah.
it's like that's how like a fractional resource does not turn over. Like they're on demand, and it's a good way to plug somebody in for
Yeah.
if you have somebody out of the office, even if you're taking like planned things, like if you have a whatever planned PTO, fractional resources is a great way to make sure that your business doesn't skip a beat. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then typically you can go back to the same person over and over, right? So that's where they become familiarized with your business, and
right.
they can more easily and seamlessly step in and out.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I promised myself that I would go to bed on time today.
ha,
The time
what's
change,
on
I
time
was
for you?
back on track. So like every year, right around like November, things start to get tough because of the time change,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like sleeping and sleep schedules. But then with the excitement of the holidays, I get like back onto my sleep schedule. But then when the holidays are over from January to February, I'm like, it's so difficult for me to keep that schedule. And so this happens every year where like I had just gotten back into my groove for like the past 3 weeks. And it's gotten completely ruined with the time change.
Yeah, I feel you. I went to bed, I think at like 2,
Yeah,
because I just felt so awake, even though I
yeah,
didn't
of
really sleep much the night before. And then last night, of course, the baby was up all night, so I just didn't
course.
sleep. So I'm with you. I need to go to bed on time tonight.
All
Um,
right. Let's get out of here then. Everybody's
yeah.
gotten some amazing insight and resources from us. They're full of knowledge and ready to hit the world for success. So we've done our part.
So much goodness.
All right.
Oh man. All right.
See ya.
See ya.